Popularum Progressio, or The Progress of Peoples, by Pope Paul VI. Currently in developing countries, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer due to the intervention of Western countries and the lack of accountability by those countries in helping out the disproportionately affected communities, which are the majority of those countries. The main topics that I will be addressing are the effects of the interventions themselves, the effects of greed and technology, which are two outcomes of those interventions, what we as Catholics are called to do in response to this, and the global solution that the Pope has proposed that would help alleviate and give back dignity to these people in these countries. The interventions have been going on not only by the United States, but places like Great Britain, Russia, France, Spain, all throughout the world, and there have yet to be reparations. We see many South America and African countries which suffer from poverty on a large scale, yet the people who run the countries themselves hold the majority of the country's wealth, spend it lavishly on themselves, and let the poor farmers continue to have a lack of basic necessities needed to live. These developing countries are the ones that we need to be addressing and helping to protect. Now, the effect of greed that interventions had were once these new leaders got put in power, they became accustomed to the money that they were getting from the Western countries for ousting a bad ruler before, or one that the United States didn't really agree with. They would oust him and then put in a new leader. That new leader would be fully funded by the intervening country, yet the money wouldn't trickle down to the poorer communities. Rather, the people at the top would continue to lavishly live however they would want to, and this stunts the progression of those developing countries and also hurts the dignity and the humanity of those developing people. We see that without the basic necessities, it is hard for the country itself to come out of poverty, so the whole country suffers for what the few minority do with the money and refuse to help out the rest of the population in those countries. Now, technology also is a big factor of these interventions, which many people see as positive, yet we have seen numerous negative repercussions because it does virtually the same kind of thing as greed. Once these new leaders get their hands on Western technology, they tend to idolize it and see it as more important than actually leading the country that they live in. One thing that Pope Paul VI says, which I found very interesting, is just because science and technology is progressing doesn't mean that society is progressing, which I found contradictory to today's statements on how we measure the progression of society by the technological advancements it has, and it was very interesting, and that was a very big controversy that came out by the common people, because that is the metric that we use. But they didn't share the technology for the societal good, which stunted the growth and perpetuated the greed of the rich and the minorities. Now, as Catholics, you might think that there's not a lot that we can do as individuals to counteract these interventions and the effects of these past interventions. Well, on an individual level, Pope Paul asked us to do a few things. First is something that everyone should be able to do, which is pray. It is not hard for you to pray for the end of these sufferings and for the betterment of this. A second thing that each one of us could do, potentially, even in a small way, is missionary work, whether it's supporting the missionaries or going on the missionary trips themselves. But those have helped in countless regions where they're able to bring goods to struggling communities to help give them basic necessities. There's also a role that the Catholic organizations have, is to send goods that these poor regions have been missing out on for decades, and sending them these goods like fresh water, food, basic things that people need to live. Now, the global solution was also very controversial. When Pope Paul came out with it, mostly the second part, but the first part was to stop interventions in other countries, which countries like the U.S., even though that we have economic interventions, we aren't having like as many on the boots interventions absent the Middle East. But a lot of countries have less in their interventions. But when the second part was very controversial because Pope Paul said that countries that have the means to help should give money to those to the poorer regions without interest on the loan or without expecting to get paid back, which a lot of countries saw as problematic because, well, when we give money we expect it in return. But Pope Paul the sixth is asking us like not even worry about it, like give it to them, and then we the benefit that we have is these developing countries come out of poverty. But yeah, it's a global solution not only because countries should it, but because Pope Paul VI called everyone to do it. Countries, private organizations, Catholic organizations, and individuals like ourselves. And these are my citations.